Welcome to the jobs.ac.uk's live question and answer. And our topic today is alternative career pathways after your PhD. It's an interesting topic. I think it's one of those things that when you're a PhD, it's very easy to have your head down, doing your research, be focused on that, and not necessarily thinking about careers or putting that into the back of your mind and thinking, oh, I'll come back to that later. But actually, it does really pay dividends to think about careers and your career opportunities, even up to, say, 2 years before you complete your PhD. And really think about, what is the career path that I'm going to follow? What do I need to be doing now to really prepare for that? So just to introduce myself, my name is Chris Humphrey, and I originally did a PhD in medieval studies back in the day at the University of York. But then I decided to leave academia, do a career in business, in consultancy, and I now work as a project manager in financial services. I also run a website called jobsontoast.com. So the website is a set of free resources for any PhDs who are considering their career options, and especially looking to pursue careers outside of academia. So I'm joined by a panel today. We've got a great lineup for you. So I'd just like to ask each of the panel to take about 30 seconds or so to introduce themselves and their particular specialism. So should we kick off with Pablo?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Pablo Dominguez Andersen, and I am a trained historian. So I received my PhD in 2013 from the Humboldt University in Berlin. And after my PhD, so in the transition phase, I started working for an e-commerce startup in Berlin as well, and worked in marketing there and ended up working there for 2 years. And after that, I joined a digital agency where I also worked for 1.5 years, roughly. And since last year, I now work for an academic publisher called Gruyter in Berlin as well. So I kind of made a step back towards academia, and I'm quite happy where I am right now. And now I'm excited to talk to you guys and exchange ideas and experiences.
Yeah, cool. And I think that's just an interesting point there, that just because you leave academia doesn't mean that you could never go back. So there's actually quite a lot of fluidity and an interface between academia and business and consultancy and government. So, okay, thanks, Pablo. Arathi, do you want to just tell us about yourself?
Yeah, hi, everyone. So I'm equally excited to be here because I'm a PhD student myself in the last year. And I'm a Marie Curie early stage researcher at Newcastle University. So probably in 1 year's time, I'll be asking the same question to myself, whether I want to stay here or whether I want to leave. So yeah, that's all from me.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for that. And we've got Katie.
Hi, I'm Katie Wheat from Vitae. I'm Training and Resources Development Manager there, which means I lead and take part in a whole range of projects based around the professional and career development of researchers. And wearing my second hat, I'm also a former researcher myself. I have a PhD in psychology, and before I joined Vitae 3 years ago, I was working as a postdoc in cognitive neuroscience in the Netherlands.
Fantastic. That's great. Well, thanks for that, Katie. And then last but no means least, Lee.
Hi there, my name's Lee Milligan. Hello from sunny Copenhagen. I work for Novo Nordisk, a global pharmaceutical company, and responsible for attracting talent from universities throughout Europe. I've got over 20 years of recruitment and talent attraction experience. And I guess my expert area is CV writing, cover letter writing, and preparing for interviews. So I give presentations around the world. So hopefully I'll be able to help you today.
That's fantastic. Well, thanks very much, Liam, and thanks to everybody. Just for those of you who are watching today, if you do want to ask us a question, then you can use the live chat in the right-hand corner of the screen, edge of the screen, to ask us your question. But actually, we've got a ton of questions in already. from people who've sent them in advance. So I'll just kick off with some of the questions that we've already sent. So let's start with the number one question is really, which career path should I take? So academic or industry, and how do I decide? So is that something that one of you can pick to start off? Perhaps Katie, you could advise us on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off with that one. I mean, it is such a difficult decision, and one that all researchers come across again and again in their career, not just necessarily at one fixed point. So I think there are a few things that you could do to try to get as much information as you can before you make that decision. For example, you could look into job shadowing or placements or work experience in areas that interest you. You could, in particular, review the knowledge, competencies and experience that you've already gained through your research. And also think about your personal strengths, your personal values and your motivations, because different kinds of work settings will match or not match your values so well. And to be happy at work, it really needs to be a personal fit as well as a professional fit, I think. And it doesn't necessarily have to be an either-or decision. You know, there are ways to combine an academic career with non-academic elements. For example, doing consultancy in either direction, or building a portfolio career. So yeah, it's a difficult decision, but put your research hat on, really, and do your research.
Yeah, that's a very nice tip. Well, maybe Pablo, you could just give us a bit of an insight into your own thinking and how you kind of decided and made that decision yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So I think one important thing to consider is what you kind of already pointed at before, is that it's not really a decision that you sort of take on one day and then your path is you have a sure path that you're going to follow. So it's more like a set of decisions, and for me it was also a lot of try and error. So I think it's hard to say what type of career is right for you in advance, like just on a theoretical level. So my advice would be really to try things out and see for yourself which types of jobs suit you and which don't. And I mean, also, of course, it's important to get as many informations as you can. I mean, for instance, so for me, the transition phase was really, really difficult as well, especially landing that first job and the first 2 years, because I felt I wasn't really in a good place. So, but it was a lot of try and error. And one thing I did at one point was seek counseling or training.
Okay.
That's something that a lot of universities offer now, I guess. I mean, there's career centers, and sometimes it helps to get like an outsider's perspective. And then I'd also just ask a lot of people I know, like people from different backgrounds, you know, friends, talk to them about what they do. So you can make an informed decision. And then don't think that once you start a job, you're going to be stuck there forever, right? Because there's always like a way back, or you can always switch jobs. That's how the job market works nowadays.
Yeah, I think there was some really good advice from the recent online conference Beyond the Professoriate, where they were saying like your first job after academia is not your last job. And I thought that's really great advice. You know, often the first job that you take is a kind of maybe more of a transition job, and it doesn't mean it's you're going to be in that job forever. So that's really nice. Anyone else want to come in on that particular question?
Yeah, Chris, if I could just pitch in. So I had the opportunity to talk to Jan McCuff from Vitae last year. And it was very surprising to hear that there is a trend now that okay, you have your standard question that is industry or academia, But there are a lot of other opportunities like entrepreneurship or policy making, getting into a research funding body. So I think it's important that you become a little proactive and start talking to people to find out what opportunities or options are out there, rather than the black and white of industry or academia.
Yeah, no, that's a really nice piece of advice actually, because it's so it's not an either or choice.
Yeah.
And maybe reflecting a little bit back on what people have said, it's what suits you and what fits your particular circumstances, your aspirations. I'm really be clear that entrepreneurship. I think I'm really seeing that amongst PhDs and researchers. More and more people are feeling confident to sort of start their own business and sort of set up on their own. So, okay. Lee, did you want to just come in on that one?
Yeah, I think I'd add to definitely the using your network is definitely an important aspect. And, think about people who've studied something similar to yourself. What have they gone on to do? And speak to those alumni. I think there are plenty of opportunities to meet companies as well. The likes of most universities will run career fairs. I'd say go to those career fairs, prepare yourself before, ask relevant questions to different companies you're interested in, read about those companies, and then go to company presentations, and really get one-on-one with the company representatives. Then you can really get an impression of if that's going to be you, that's going to be your future career. And there will be people there with a similar background to yourself. Ask them as many questions as you can, really get their personal impression as to why they made the move from academia to industry, or obviously vice versa, some have switched back as well. So really use the network and use the opportunities available to you.
Right, fantastic. Okay, well, I think that really sets the scene for people who maybe haven't thought so much about this so far, but that kind of sets the scene. So I've had another question which really comes with people, perhaps if they're spent a lot of time in academia, or they've really not had much experience outside of academia. Like, how do you really start going about this kind of search and understanding what options are available to you? So has anyone got any tips for really finding out about actual jobs? I mean, we've talked a little bit about finding out about industries or what suits you, but where would you actually go to find jobs that are going to be suitable for researchers? I think, Katie, maybe you could pick up for us.
Yeah. Well, one place is so Vitae has done a lot of work, surveys and research around looking at what careers researchers do pursue, and I think one of the really nice resources that's come out of that is a whole series of career stories from former researchers, either former PhDs or former research staff who've gone into different work settings and then given an account of what it's like to work there, what kind of job they do, how they found that move into a new area. And so that can be a starting point of looking at what other people in your discipline have gone on to do. Another nice thing, if your institution provides it, or perhaps if your professional society provides it, is to get in touch with alumni in your discipline as well. Universities often invite their former PhD graduates in to just say what they're doing now and where they've been since they graduated. So if you have the opportunity to attend an event like that, I definitely would.
Okay, well, thanks for that. Anyone else want to come in on with some tips about specifically where to look for jobs?
Can I add? I think, in most countries there are job sites, and I'd say sign up to those job sites, sign up to the areas that are of interest for you, and often on a daily basis you receive emails with the type of positions that are out there. So take a look at those positions, see what's available at the moment, and on the majority of job ads there will be a contact person. So don't be afraid to contact that person if you have specific questions about the relevance of your education, the relevance of the actual level of education you've reached. But they're the very relevant questions to those contact individuals. Yeah,
nice. I mean, one bit of advice that I tend to give people is that like for myself, I had a PhD in medieval studies in history, but when I'm looking for a job outside of academia, people aren't going to be advertising for people with my degree. Necessarily, but what they are looking for is to fill positions in their organizations, like an analyst or a project manager or a researcher. So really sort of think about and find out about job titles and sort of think of yourself in terms of job titles that people are hiring, rather than thinking of yourself in terms of a somebody with a particular academic background or who practices it in a specific discipline. And so I think that can be really interesting if you start to focus on an industry, say health or something like that, and then you're putting in keywords for the kinds of positions that might be available. So a researcher, say a project manager, analyst, like data analyst, data scientist. That's one way that you can really begin to sort of find out what's on offer and see how you fit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, if I could add one more thing, or maybe two things. One, as I said before, try and ask friends and people you know that are not in academia, just like what do they do, just to find out what types of jobs and what types of industries there are. I mean, that's I think that's always a good starting point. And another thing I just thought of is look on social media, especially on Twitter. For instance, if you follow like hashtags like alt-ag or post-ag, where a lot of people write about their experiences in trying to find jobs after their PhD. And luckily now there's like lots of people who share that type of information online. So that might be another starting point for your research on that.
Okay. Anything more on where to find jobs? Or we could move on to the next question. I just see that we've got a question come in from the chat, really. Somebody's asked if we train ourselves to become an academic, not having much experience in the private sector or taking breaks between our studies, how do we transition into a non-academic sector? It's a really nice question because it sort of frames this whole thing really around transferable skills. And that's, I think, to me, one of the key things, certainly in my own transition, is when I really began to understand that I didn't just have a degree or lots of degrees and publications, but actually I'd gained a whole set of transferable skills that people outside of academia were really interested in, wanted to hire me on the basis of having those skills. So maybe we can just think for a bit about what are some of the most transferable skills that would help towards a job or career outside of academia. Somebody like to come in on that with some suggestions of transferable skills that PhDs have acquired?
Yeah, I can kick us off with that one. I mean, I think it's not necessarily just thinking about a list of skills, but maybe thinking about the kinds of responsibilities that you have as a researcher. So, you might submit journal articles, for example. You're not going to find many job specifications that ask you to submit journal articles, but you might find jobs looking for technical report writing, synthesizing and presenting complex information, responding to critical feedback, leading an international collaboration, for example. They're all the kinds of experiences and skills that you would have built up through something that initially looks like quite a narrow experience. But I think it's the most important thing is to translate your experiences into the language that the employer finds familiar and is looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very nice.
And if I can add to that from an employer's perspective, what I'd always advise candidates to do is to look through the job ad and actually write a list of the personal skills and the technical skills the company's looking for. Then match examples you have from your experience to that list. And you'll find you have more and more examples than you think that match the requirements of the company. But also, if and when you get to the interview stage, you're going to be asked to give examples, lots of examples to back up what you're stating. So I think it's an important process to follow and to do it a few times. And you'll find you get more and more examples that are relevant, and you'll have more and more transferable skills than you actually think.
Yeah, nice. So actually, you're really analysing the job advert for the kind of way to present yourself back to the employer. Arathi,
if I could just,
come in.
If I could just add on to what Lee was saying, when I've spoken to colleagues of mine and PhD students, I've always found that when they read a job advert, they just come to the conclusion that, oh, I do not have the necessary skills, and therefore I'm not going to apply for this job. But just like Lee mentioned, it's very important to go back to all your experiences. For example, if they have asked for a managerial skill, if you have supervised a PhD student, or if you've demonstrated in a lab, that counts as experience, because you have organizational skills. Then you have managed a group of students, you've taken care of their responsibilities, so their report writing, and you've been responsible for them. So to find a way to translate that into something when you apply for a job is very important, and it's very good to hear that from you, Lee, that you mention it now in this panel.
And sorry, just one small point to add to that is many hiring managers are looking for the five-legged sheep. They're looking for the impossible candidate who doesn't exist. So don't worry if you don't fulfill everything on that job ad. Of course, if they're asking for 15 years of work experience, then you're probably not, you don't have the relevant background. But don't think you have to specifically fulfill every single requirement, which is a mistake that many will make.
Yeah, because I think that's, like you say, there isn't the perfect candidate. So each candidate that goes for a job is going to have particular strengths and weaknesses. Some candidates might be already from within the industry. Some people might be transitioning from another industry into that industry, but employers can look favorably on that and think, well, what new perspective, what creativity, what extra skills does that person bring who are coming into my industry? So yeah, don't rule yourself out. Pablo, did you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, sure. Maybe, well, for one, I think the aspect of really translating what you've learned during your PhD for an employer is super important. And it took me some time to learn that, because when I started applying for jobs outside of academia, I used to talk about a lot about the kind of research I'd done, or like the topics I was specialized in. And then I quickly realized that most employers aren't really interested in that, because in many cases you're not going to be working on those topics in your new job. And so it's really important to really give them a list of what you've done and explain to them why you're a good fit for the position, especially considering that most hiring managers don't have more than like 30 seconds or a minute to look at your resume, because they have like 50 applications or 100 or whatever. So you really have to be super focused and try to be as helpful as you can for the hiring managers in explaining why you are a good fit and why what you've done really qualifies you for that position. And that's like a lot of translation work, but it's really the most important thing, especially when you apply for your first job after your PhD and you feel like you don't have a lot of experience in that particular job field.
Yeah, so this ability to be able to translate your skills and experience you acquired through your academic career and background, being able to translate that into a kind of a language that an employer can understand and make sense to them. And I guess, like we've already said, trying to use the job advert to inform that. So like a classic one for me is always in academia, we talk about teaching, because we teach people, we transfer knowledge to them, they learn. But in business, we talk about training. Which is the same thing, really. We're trying to transfer knowledge from people about systems or something, or into people's heads, but we just call it training. So it's a little bit of learning that kind of the language of the sort of sector that you're applying into. Okay. Anyone else got anything to say about anything else to add about transferable skills there? Just see if there's anything more on the chat. There is one question just asking about if people don't have a lot of work experience, is that something that an employer might think is a barrier? I mean, I guess if you have spent all your life working in academia, then you're applying into a particular, another sector of the economy, finance or health or government. I guess there's a sort of a perception that employers, may be looking for a background in that. So how would you suggest that people could overcome that particular challenge?
Well, I think one of the most important things to start off with is to make sure on your CV that you frame your PhD as a professional experience in itself. I would always put it under the work experience section and in language that employers can understand, you know, your key responsibilities and achievements in that time, for example. You know, you can list it as well as an educational or qualification, but I would really make sure that you position yourself as having a significant time of experience as a professional researcher, because you're not a student, you know, being told what to do. You know, you're often getting paid to do this research.
Yeah, that's a really, really good piece of advice, actually, to think of yourself as a professional. One bit of advice that I give people, I've written about this on my blog, is think of yourself as a professional X, and try and think of what word would you put into the X. So don't talk about yourself as a researcher or as a PhD, especially not a PhD student, but talk about yourself as a professional X. So that X could be a professional researcher, professional project manager, a professional scientist, ecologist, depending on what your particular discipline is, but make sure that you sort of professionalize yourself. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in there. I think, so for one, that's really important advice, you know, don't present yourself as a PhD student, but as a professional who has worked in science or in research. And still, even if you do that, coming from your PhD into a new industry, it might mean that you're gonna start maybe in a more junior position if you're transitioning to a new industry. But I wouldn't necessarily shy away from that, because I think in the industry, you can really, you know, from that junior position in a relatively short amount of time, you can come to another position, because if you have a high learning curve and you're really good at what you do, you can transition from, like, say, I don't know, junior marketing manager to a marketing manager or a senior marketing manager in a relatively short amount of time. So especially for the first job, that might be something you should consider, even if you're 30 or older when you finish your PhD.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just to add to that, I think I often talk about answering questions before they're asked. And now, as a recruiter, we're probably looking for gaps. We're looking for reasons to ask you questions. And one of those questions would be, why do you want to switch from academia to industry? You need to have that answer very clear in your application. So you're already answering the question before it's asked, and at the interview stage. Positive reasons. Many will give negative reasons about academia, why they want to move away, but give the positive reasons why you want to move towards industry. And we've talked a lot at the moment about what you can offer the company, what you can offer the company, but also think about your passion for the company. Unfortunately, very few applicants will actually write about the company itself, why they want to work for the company, projects they've read about, company values, etc. Show your passion for the company as well, but also give that explanation why you want to move, and with solid reasons be behind that.
Okay, nice. Well, thanks for that. And Arathi, have you sort of, you're in academia now, but have you tried to build up non-academic work experience as you've gone along?
Well, to be honest, Chris, I have to say that I'm a Marie Curie fellow. So in our project framework, we have a lot of allocation for this. So with respect to training and industrial placements and secondments and so on and so forth. I feel that this should be there for other PhD students as well, at least as an opportunity to apply for, let's say, a 2-month internship or a placement at a company, just to get a feel of what it's like. They have fantastic programs where where you have an industrial PhD, so you work for an industry as well as a PhD student in the university, and all these really count. Or, for example, if you have some professional training courses or certificates, these can be done during the course of your PhD, and that really helps as well. And just to add on to what Lee was saying before, it's very good to do your homework. So you know that you're in a certain field, and if you want to transition into an industry in that field, it would be nice to know who the big players are or who the big companies are and what specific skills are they looking for, or what projects do they have, or what are the broad expertise fields. So doing this homework will help you build your CV and portfolio starting from day one in your PhD, and not probably towards the end when you're done or you've already defended your thesis.
Yeah, well, that's really nice advice. I think so. That's a good point, that actually some people are in programs that are actually structured to give them work experience, yes. which is great. But if you're in a if you're in a PhD in a program that doesn't have that, then really you've got to be quite proactive in trying to gain that work experience yourself. Perhaps, like you say, taking an internship, for instance. I mean, if you've got 3 or 4 years during your PhD, you have got plenty of time. So maybe you could do an internship over the summer, or take a project management qualification, for instance. So those opportunities are available to you. I think it comes back to what we were saying before about being proactive, not waiting to the end and you're handing in your dissertation and they're only then really thinking about, okay, what should I have done? Okay, well that's a nice one. Just the next, it sort of leads quite well onto the preparation of CVs. And I think this is just like a real something that people who spent a lot of time in academia are used to, a kind of CV being a kind of big document that sort of summarizes all their achievements, their publications, their teaching experience, papers they've given, that type of thing. It can be a bit of a challenge to then make the switch to more like a CV for a job outside of academia in government or in the third sector or in business, where people are looking for something much shorter, maybe around 1 or 2 pages. And often in the States, that might be something that's really called a resume. So have you got some tips for how to turn your CV into an effective resume? Perhaps Lee, is that you could say a bit about what sort of things you'd be looking for on an application?
Yeah, and I think again related to what I started with in terms of the job ad, I always advise make those 2 lists. Which technical skills are the company looking for, which personal skills, and make sure you're clearly matching them in your CV. So you shouldn't have a standard CV. It's all right to have a skeleton, but each CV, it should be obvious for me as a recruiter that you've geared that CV specifically to that job ad and to the company. There should be relevant examples in the CV. It should be easy on the eye. It should be, as Pablo said before, we often have a few minutes to scan through. So basically, I've almost got that skills list in my head, and I'm matching it to the CV. Can I clearly see you have the skills that we're looking for in your CV? And again, backing things up with examples, not just stating, I'm a good team player. Anyone can put that. If you back it up with a solid example, it suddenly it gives meaning. So really make your CV relevant to the job ad, backing it up with examples and relevant to the company as well.
Right, nice. Thank you for that. Katie, is this something that you advise people on?
Yes, I mean, I couldn't really say it any better than Lee. I guess the only thing I would add is probably to try to seek examples if you can. If you can try to get hold of CVs of people already doing the kinds of jobs or working in the kind of sector that you're interested in moving into, then that will give you a good idea of their expectations. And there are a lot of CV examples also on the Vitae website of different types of formats. So if you're used to a multi-page academic CV, then you might want to look into things like competency-based CVs, which is a bit different to the sort of traditional chronological format that most people would be more used to.
Yeah, and where can people go to get those examples?
There are quite a lot of examples, templates and real examples on the Vitae website. So we'll tweet them and then people can follow that and have a look.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for that. Any more tips on CVs?
I mean, I guess I would say one thing is that the differentiator between a CV and a cover letter. I would say the CV, in your mentality, have the CV as the past, the cover letter as your future, and what you can do for that company in the future with solid examples. But a very small tip I'd say is get somebody else to check your CV before you send it. So the small details are correct. It's something I do myself when I'm applying for jobs. So I definitely get somebody else to have a good check through to make sure you're getting the message across that you want to get across.
Yeah, That's nice. It's we can easily become just blinded to our own little typos or poor grammar. And well, I think it's interesting. There is a question just on the chat, really, just people asking about how to represent the PhD on the CV. But I think we've really answered that from what Katie said. Is that because I have had this thing before about should I even leave my PhD off the CV? But as Katie said, you can represent your CV well, your PhD well on a CV. If you put that time spent under your work experience, and you can call yourself a research project manager. So really make sure that you do frame that correctly. And not just as education, but it is actually your work experience. Okay. There is a question somebody's just asked us around. We're talking a lot about applying for jobs. Would the panel have any tips about entrepreneurship or starting your own business after your PhD? Arathi, I think you did mention something about that. Is there any other sort of resources or insights that you have around being able to start up on your own?
Well, the reason that I mentioned that was when I went for one of the conferences. So there was this person who was talking about his startup company called Dating Scientists, or Scientists for Dating, and everybody was under the impression that it had something to do with the personal life of scientists. But apparently, it was a forum to bring scientists together with policymakers, so that scientists can have an impact in policymaking. So these are small ideas, and I personally know a lot of people who had spin-offs from university. So they have an idea, and during their PhD or probably during their postdoc, and they feel that it's a very lucrative idea. So ideally what they do is then they spin off from the university and then have a small startup within the premises and then slowly grow on from there. And it's because I also saw a couple of questions about consultancy and independent jobs, and when you don't have to apply to other industries. So these can be some tips, and you can find plenty of resources online for entrepreneurship, maybe like an event or talking to the right people and so on.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually. So we might think about entrepreneurship as starting your own company, but it could, and employing people, but it could be that you just set yourself up as an independent consultant, and you're kind of working for yourself, either on a sort of fixed term basis or with a range of clients. So yeah, it's really important not to rule those things out. And very interesting what you said, that actually in the university context itself may provide resources and facilities for startup, for incubation. So it's not like you're just thrown out into the cold, but actually if you take the time, that could really help you get your own business off the ground. Just a small example of that is at Newcastle University now we have something called the Science Central. So that's where most of the spin-offs from Newcastle University are going to head into, and a couple of them are working on our project. So you have a spin-off company, which is a consortium partner on a Marie Curie Horizon 2020 program. So you have different options to collaborate and set off with your idea. Okay, nice. Anyone else like to come in on that? Okay, we can move on. We've got another question here, which is an interesting one. Is why would an employer hire a PhD or a postdoc over a recent undergraduate? Sometimes people can feel that I've spent this time after my undergraduate degree, accumulating this other experience and doing this research. But really, what is the employer really going to value that? Perhaps Lee, you might be able to say what you would really be thinking that a PhD or a postdoc would bring to the organization compared with like a recent fresh undergraduate.
And I think I often hear this, that the question's quite negatively phrased, and I think in a way you need to be more positive in what can you actually contribute in a positive way from the experiences you've been through. And again, that's about relating it to the job ad, as we talked about earlier, given you've got far more examples of situations you've been in as a PhD than you have than recent graduates have. Utilize those examples in a very positive way in the application process, but also at the interview process. So I'd say put it in a positive light, put a real positive spin on what you've done. you have those examples. That's what we're looking for as recruiters.
Fantastic. I really like that. It's great. It's great to hear that sort of positive message.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with what Lee said. And I think, I mean, in the end, the answer to that question is really, you have to explain to the employer why he should hire you with a PhD instead of a recent undergraduate student, because that's like, it's up to you to explain to them the type of experiences you have that are valuable to whatever job you're applying for. And I think if you start thinking about it, all the experiences that you have, you will surely come up with a list of why you are valuable for that position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, just to give one example of my own, when I went for my first job outside academia, was with a sort of startup company who were trying to secure investment in the company. They were quite impressed by the fact that I'd secured funding for, to fund my research. So the fact that I'd got funding for my master's degree, the fact that I'd got funding for my PhD research project, the fact that I got funding for my postdoctoral fellowship. So they sort of saw that actually here's somebody who has got experience of writing proposals, writing convincing, persuasive applications to gain grants, to gain funding. So that's just one example that, for instance, an undergraduate wouldn't have, but whereas say a postgraduate would have. Okay, well, thanks for that, Pablo. Anyone else want to come in on that question? Katie, yeah?
Yeah, I think if I could just add that, so 3.5 years after graduating with a PhD, less than 20% are working in higher education research. So this is from our series of research called What Do Researchers Do, which looks at the HESA data following graduates when they move on. And it shows a cluster of occupations that typically do employ doctorate holders, which are things, I mean, some of them are fairly obvious, like pharmaceuticals, but also like public administration, finance, business, IT, charities, health and education. So I think it just highlights the value that employers do see and how needed those high-level PhD skills are for the society and economy more broadly, outside of what you might think of PhD graduates as doing just research. Actually, they're really valuable. And as others have said, it's just about making sure that you communicate well to the employer the value that you have and the fit that you have with that company and with that position.
Yeah, that's nice. I really like what you said there, Katie, about the high-level skill set, because it can be easy to think that the main thing we've acquired is the actual PhD itself, like the dissertation and then the qualification. But actually, like you say, you've acquired a set of very high-level skills, that employers are going to really be looking for, and especially in today's sort of knowledge, information sort of economy. Okay, nice. Any more contributions on that one? I did. There is a question, and this is I see this quite often. Somebody just asked about is it worth sort of maintaining a blog while you're doing your research? And I think people have sometimes mixed feelings about should they be sort of public, on Twitter or writing a blog, or should they kind of sort of more stay anonymous? So what are some of your thoughts on that, about blogging or tweeting during your research? Arathi, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant idea to be active on social media, or for example on Twitter or LinkedIn, or to have your own blog. Because I also read a couple of articles that if you're blogging during your PhD period, that actually makes you pretty good at writing scientific articles. Because sometimes it's nice to take a break from all the technical writing, but it's important because you are putting an image of yourself out there even before you reach a stage where you actually physically apply for the job. So there was a question on when is the right time to apply for the job, but there is also a big element on how you prepare yourself and how you make that image of yourself. So if you go to a conference, then you meet someone, you add that person on LinkedIn, you maintain that relationship, you maintain that network that you have by tweeting something that you think is relevant, or you post articles on LinkedIn. It's a very good way to get noticed, not only for yourself, but also for the work that you're doing. It's a very good way of promoting yourself.
Yeah, I think it's one thing I always think is that while you're a PhD or a postdoc, maybe you might have a profile on the university, on your department's website or web page. But of course, when you come to leave academia, taken down. So actually, you need some way of putting yourself into the public domain. So, for instance, having your own blog is good, and having a LinkedIn profile as well is also key to sort of maintaining that sort of visible presence. Yeah, is that something you've done, Pablo? Did you do that as
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, since I moved to online marketing, I started in the transition phase to become more active on social media. And I don't have a personal blog, but I think especially being on Twitter for me was very helpful to network and also to find out about job opportunities that are out there. So I definitely recommend it. I think, and I mean, you have to be aware of the fact that if you apply for a job at some point, the employer is going to Google you. So it's important. I mean, it kind of depends on what type you are. If you don't feel comfortable being on social media, I don't think you have to be, but I think it's important to sort of, you know, everyone kind of Googles themselves once in a while, so it's important to try and be in control of what shows up there when and be aware of the fact that employers are going to Google you and they're going to try to find out stuff about you. So I try to be proactive about that and try to be in control of the image that that you have online. So yeah.
And just to add to that, I think most employers will definitely look on LinkedIn. So I would strongly advise you to get a LinkedIn profile, to keep it up to date, to get recommendations on the LinkedIn profile. And also, before you go for an interview, for example, look at the interviewers' profiles. It gives you information on their background that can be important. But LinkedIn is the resource that a lot of recruiters will use. So make sure you've got a very strong profile on there.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for that. Just there's another question now, which is a little bit more of a personal question, but really asking members of the panel, did they know what they wanted to do before their PhD? You know, while they were doing it, they want to do what they want to do after, or did they change their mind during their PhD? I think if I just give from my own perspective, I was very set on becoming an academic, and I actually had 5 interviews at different UK universities for lectureship positions, but I was unsuccessful each time. And from my point of view, I just wanted to ensure that I had continuity of employment towards the end of my postdoctoral fellowship. So that's why I put together what I call like my plan B, was if I wasn't successful in gaining a job in higher education, I was planning to transition into industry instead. And so that's actually what happened to me. So I kind of, even though I had my plan A, I also had a plan B, which became my plan A. You know, and actually, when I look back, I'm really pleased and happy how things have panned out. But so, what about you guys? Did you change your mind through necessity or through chance? Katie, yeah.
Yeah, I 100% definitely changed my mind. I mean, I think if you look back at my career, going backwards, you can trace what looks like a really logical and well-planned out set of circumstances. Because as we were just talking about, you know, I was really active on Twitter, I had a blog. During my postdoc, I co-founded the ECR chat hashtag. Through that, raised my profile a lot, took part in various online activities, was invited to speak as a researcher at the Vitae conference, did a lot of networking there, and eventually that led through to a job at Vitae, which all looks, couldn't have planned it better. But actually, if you look at it sort of chronologically, there were so many different branches that were going on, things I was pursuing and trying out that didn't go anywhere. So I think when people look at other people's career stories, it can look like they just go from A to B to C and tie it all up really nicely. But actually, there are lots of little dead ends and things going on there, trying things out that don't always go. So, you might be, working your way towards your academic career because that's your goal, but keep lots of other little things, other interests alive, because you don't know for sure what your path is going to be until you've gone down it.
Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit of a case of kind of keeping your options open, and I think sometimes it's quite funny how you can look back and tell a story of your career, but actually you didn't necessarily have that plan. But often it does work out, and you can kind of make sense of it. Nice. Okay, thanks, Katie. Lee, did you want to come in on that one?
I mean, I think obviously I meet and see hundreds, thousands of PhDs a year, and those that have transferred into industry. But I think the word serendipity comes into play a lot. It's a lot of chance. It's a lot of chance meetings. Obviously, you can, doing a lot of things we talked about today, you can help your career path, but don't be worried and don't think that everybody has this perfect career path planned out. It's more often than not the case. So don't think you should have a perfect plan ahead of you. Help your plan, that's for sure, but it shouldn't be perfect. Not many people's are.
Nice, thank you. Yeah, it's easy to be a sort of perfectionist, isn't it, on these things? But chance and serendipity does really play a role. Arathi, what's your thoughts on? Are you very set on a specific goal, or are you?
No, I mean, following this discussion, serendipity was a very nice term there. But also, I don't know, a lot of PhD students feel this thing called the imposter syndrome. So basically, they winged it till now, and now they're in a position, and now you're like, okay, so I'm confused. I don't know what to do. But from what Katie and Lee have said, it's being proactive is certainly important, but a lot of it is also chance. So, for example, the person that you meet at a conference can influence you, or if you attend a panel discussion like this, maybe some feedback from there helps you get set on a track. But it's always nice to have access to these opportunities and to go get them, so that So for example, okay, so I've done this training. I don't know if it's useful in my PhD, but maybe it's useful to me later, or maybe this is what I really want to do. So I'm still exploring my options, but not only from a technical skills point of view, but also transversal skills, because it's really important to have that comprehensive profile, rather than okay, so I have A, B technical skills, and I can only be employed in A and B industry, or in this sector. So yeah.
Yes, you're actually really focusing on breadth, and rather than just than being too focused. And I just think that's just really good advice. That it's just so easy to focus on, especially with your dissertation, just to focus on that. But actually, it's so important to sort of put your head up and see the wider world, and take advantage of those opportunities. Okay, well, that's great. So I think we've just got maybe time for one last question, just really around how someone's asked, how difficult is it to come back to academia from industry? Has anybody? I mean, once I left, I left. Although I do go and give some careers talks in universities about making the transition. So I do go back to universities, but just for a careers purpose. But anyone got any insights just around, how easy is it to make that transition back?
Well, I guess it kind of depends on what you define as academia. I mean, so I was in online marketing, then I worked for a digital agency, and now I'm in academic publishing. So I'm kind of closer to academia. And for me, this actually has worked quite well, because so I did something completely different after my PhD. It had, like, working for an e-commerce startup had really nothing to do with the research I'd done before, but I learned a lot about digital communication, marketing, and things like that. And those things I learned there allowed me to get into the position I am now, which is an online marketing manager for an academic publisher. So, for instance, or that would be one example of how you can sort of transition back towards academia. I mean, it's not. I'm not a professor now, but I'm sort of closer to the topics and to the world I came from when I started out. And so
yeah,
I think
a nice
there's
example.
Yeah.
I mean, do you actually use, Pablo, the academic knowledge that you acquired? Is that useful for you when you're looking to commission publications?
Well, I'm in marketing, and I'm not an editor, so I don't really do much on the commissioning side. But of course, we also put out titles in history and in the humanities, and so that definitely, I mean, the understanding I have of those disciplines definitely helps me in sort of marketing titles or marketing products that we have in those disciplines. So, and also for securing this position, I mean, I noticed when I applied for the job that people with this specific skill set are quite rare on the job market. You know, people that have academic experience in research, and experience in online marketing. So, and that was something that came up during my application, is that this is something that employers really value. So whatever the way is you sort of take, I think the skills you acquire are going to help you with moving on towards other positions.
That's fantastic. Well, thanks. I've just got one eye on the time. I think we're just moving into the last 5 minutes now. So what I'd like to do is just ask each of the panel members if you can just give me what's something that you would really take away from, like a little nugget that you could take away from today, or a sort of top tip that you'd like to share, just as we close. So, Katie, have you got something there?
Yes, but I'm going to steal my top tip from others, because we surveyed former research staff across Europe who had moved out of academia, and they said that they recommend that you be brave and be confident in making your move. As other panelists have already said, you know, the door doesn't necessarily close behind you, and your first move out is not the only job you'll ever have. So be brave and be confident and make your move.
Lovely, thank you for that. Lee?
I'd say, yeah, a few things. One, do your research, that's for sure. In doing that, use your network. It's invaluable. And when you apply for positions, make sure they're relevant. Make sure it's specific to the company, specific to the role. It's very, very important. It makes you stand out.
Right, lovely. Thank you for that. And Arathi?
Yeah, I would just say that start from day one. So as important as your content, so is your presentation. So not just presentation of your results or your research, but also of yourself. So maintaining a good public profile of yourself and your research, and just being proactive.
Okay. Yeah, and so Pablo.
Yeah, so I guess my final tip would be, you know, stay positive and don't lose hope because I remember that the transition phase, especially for the first job, it was a tough time, because at some point I thought, okay, this is horrible. I'm never going to find a decent job, and I think that's something that's fairly common among people just finishing their PhD, but it's also common that it's just a phase. So the first job maybe isn't going to be super great, but it's going to get you started, and in most cases it's going to improve from there. So just stay aware of the fact that this is just a phase, and it's going to get better.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely key. Is that you know, things are going to improve, and that's without a doubt. So Well, thanks very much to the panel for sharing those top tips. Just to say to everyone listening in, for more careers advice, articles, ebooks, and other resources, you can go to the jobs.ac.uk website and look at the careers advice section. The recording of this event will be available, posted up on the jobs.ac.uk website, and I'm sure those of us who've taken part will be sending it. We can promote it and send out the link. But take a look at the YouTube channel too of jobs.ac.uk. So I'd just like to conclude by thanking everybody, the four members of the panel, for their time today and all their sort of their generous insights and everything that they've contributed. And just to say thank you too for watching. And I think I'll leave you with that final piece of advice: be proactive. Thanks very much.